kicking the guards.
I'd run off and I'd cry.
Here comes Yopo, the father.
When kids in the village would sing that in front of Dad.
Se soia.
Oi, Soy, you get so angry.
Yopo,
Yeah.
sorry, son, walk like a man.
Our sister would catch us wearing her stuff.
But I thought I looked pretty. At dances in the village, I'd want to put on the Tulinga headdress.
Then, the whole village was there. People would laugh. The light went dark, and I felt nothing. But I'd go to the mountain.
And dance by the waterfall.
Being free was a beautiful thing. If I leave, I'll take my roots with me. A piece of home to carry.
In my blood.
Hold on tight.
As I shift in the wind, I'll land and plant these pieces, and I'll grow. Walk like a man, Yopo. That's what Dad used to yell. Nah. I reckon I'll walk just like me.
Sao malosi ilelalolangi ai wangalo yatea uole silisili ese olelangi e uina o savali ile pongisa ai salofa mai oia ole
Hello everyone, welcome to this week's news and community spotlights. Get ready for this month's free content drop. Whether you're an artist, designer, or programmer, you're sure to find something that catches your eye. First up, Modular Sci-Fi Indoor and Outdoor Environment Pack by Jesse Storm's Assets features everything you need to create brooding planetary landscapes and moody sci-fi interiors. This includes things like outdoor sci-fi architecture, interior assets, and nature elements such as rocks, cliffs, grass, and swampy water. Assets are fully modular and customizable, so you can jump in and adjust shaders, recolor elements, and add decals. Next, build out your own stunning city with Tokyo Stylized Environment by Shua Laurent. Fully modular, you can rearrange the components to create street scenes in a myriad of configurations. The pack includes interchangeable materials for the modular meshes, window and door variations, dirt, ground leaves, and road marking decals. You can see an option of how it could all be put together in the included example scene with fully optimized lumen lighting. Advanced Flock System by Crafts Asset Studio, or otherwise known as CAS, is perfect for undersea environments, aquariums, or any other subaqueous scene. The fish in the simulation react to objects, ponds, and characters. You can have up to 5,000 fish instances running at 120 frames per second, or up to 20,000 running at 50 to 60 frames per second, based on AMD Ryzen 5 2700X speeds. And you can even bring in your own fish meshes to use with the system. The Replicated Grab system by Atlas Studio automatically integrates into objects in your world, enabling you to interact with all physical objects in your scene for a fast and easy way to replicate physics in your project. You can customize the system to fit your needs by rotating objects, adjusting the zoom, release, throwing speeds, and more. We heard you liked environment packs, so Snowy Train Market delivered with their environments bundle of 6 maps. The themed environments included in the pack are Cyberpunk Neon City, Forgler Desert Map, Wonderland Tomato City Environment, Treehouse Horror Environment, Sci-Fi Environment Engine Room, and the Dungeon Hellcage Environment. Jump in and start exploring. Remember to grab this month's content fast. It's only free until the end of May. With that in mind, let's get into the community spotlights for this week. The Pumpkin Farm by Urs Sabazi is an adorable stylized environment that was created utilizing workflows they learned at university. The scenic cottage was beautifully rendered in Engine with animated foliage and a cozy, lazy smoke VFX curling up from the chimney. Using a mix of several programs, you can see the progress over time of this project on their ArtStation, or check out some of their other lovingly crafted, stylized works. Sister Thornrose by Alvaro Sanchez is their latest real-time model aimed at blending dark fantasy with religious elements, drawing inspiration from games like Dark Souls. Based on the concept art of Jordy Noop, this 3D creation sits at a little over 52,000 tries and features 6 UV sets. If you'd like to see some more background on the character or the process behind how it was built, you can do so at their ArtStation. Asimov Bar by Blake Fridas is a stunning scene inspired by the works of Isaac Asimov and all things Art Deco, paying homage to beloved titles like BioShock and Prey as well as other media. They chose to pursue this project to fully explore trim sheets, modularity, hard surface modeling techniques, and material and texture generation, utilizing programs such as ZBrush, Maya, and the Substance Suite, and finalizing the project in Unreal. Most props, materials, and textures were created by them, with the only exceptions being the blood decals and debris, which were sourced from Quixel Megascans. If you'd like to see more of their work, you can do so at their ArtStation. That's it for today's news and community spotlights. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Inside Unreal, a weekly show where we learn, explore, and celebrate everything Unreal. I am your host, Tina. I am also a surprise guest today. I'm going to be doing a lot more talking than usual. But hi, I'm Tina. Welcome. And then next, you may have seen him previously. You should have, because he's been around a lot lately. Well, you're around usually anyway. This is a disaster starting this all. Dan, say hi.
Hi.
Who are you?
Yeah. Ever present, even if not known. Yes, I'm Dan Hutnick. I run the back end of the live stream, and I'm also a very, very old environment artist.
Very, very old.
Very
I have
weathered.
pulled myself from the dredges of the earth to talk up with you all today.
I am an abyssal creature, or so the lore says.
This is true. This is what the lore says. So, hello everyone. If you can't tell from this intro, today's going to be pretty chill. We're going to keep things pretty relaxed. We've got some stuff we're going to walk through with you, but the main thing is please feel free to interject in the chat as well today. We're going to be taking questions kind of as they come. But the topic, let me start there. Let me back up. Hold on. Let me back it up. Okay. This is fine. Everyone relax. Everyone chill out. It's Global Accessibility Day. Yay! Or GAD, as I will probably be referring to it from this point forward. Today is actually the 13th Global Accessibility Awareness Day, 13th GAD. The purpose of GAD is to get everyone talking, thinking, and learning about digital access and inclusion of people with different disabilities, basically. They have a website. Dan, I don't know if you have the time or ability to toss it up there. There we are.
Magic.
Jazz hands. The magic of technology, everybody. But yeah, today is Global Accessibility Awareness Day. So in honor of that, in celebration of that, in honor sounds sad for some reasons. In celebration of that, we're going to be talking about some different ways of considering accessibility while you're developing your projects. A lot of this, I'll be honest, is mostly directed towards game development, but that doesn't mean that these concepts can't also be taken over into other forms of media, such as film and things like that as well. But I do just want to be straight up that a lot of this is going to be more so focused at games and game development more directly. But like I said, there's still some stuff that you could take to other forms of media, but just something to consider while going into this. But this is not the first time that we've celebrated GAD or even talked about accessibility on the channel. We have 2 other Inside Unreal shows that we've done before based around accessibility, and both of those dive into the engine itself and actually walk through the process of how to set up some of these other things. So I'll make sure we get the links for that in chat in just a second here. But the first one is called Making Accessible Experiences. That one was from, I think, 2 years ago. I think,
Sounds
don't quote
right.
me on that. Either 2 or 3, something like that. And it walks through how to set up different processes for these accessibility features like subtitles and I think key remapping and stuff like that. And then we did one last year for GAD as well called Developing Accessibility Features, where we had on a super, super incredible indie dev who walked through how he set up a bunch of the features that he had on his own game that were very accessibility centered. And he had some really great insights. So if you're looking for more content that we've done for that, you can do so by checking those out. Saw our mods have the links of the chat because they're great. Let's see. I see a question here of, will y'all be doing anything addressing VIMS or visually induced motion sickness today? Yes, actually, we will be talking about motion sickness today because that is a huge thing. Then I'm glad you brought that up because a lot of people actually don't consider that as part of accessibility, but it most certainly is. So yes, we will be chatting about that. Are you going to be including people who need glasses? Kind of. We'll be talking about different levels of being visually impaired as well as color blindness on things like that. So glasses fall under that. It's a little harder. I feel like glasses specifically might more so apply to like VR topics and how to deal with also having like headsets and things like that. But we'll be talking at least about vision impairments a little bit. Let me see if there's some other questions real quick before we get into it. Is there built-in options for accessibility in the engine, or I need to make it from ground up? So there are a couple of features built into the engine for accessibility. There's a couple things that we have in there innately for speech, text-to-speech, which I'll nab. We have some documentation on that. That's actually been updated as of 5.4. So you can follow along with some of those. There's actually a quick start guide that we have for that. As well as we have some remapping tools and subtitle tools that are native to the engine as well. So some stuff innately in there. I think that's Dan, Turning Cog needs to know if you're distracted by a squirrel out of your window.
If I had seen it, I would have been. Yes. No. This is the mad dance that you don't normally see, where I'm constantly monitoring with multiple headphones, audio levels, and trying to make sure that everything sounds as good as possible. So no, it's just me pressing buttons, looking at screens, and just checking faders, making sure things are working. But had I noticed it, yeah, absolutely, I might have jumped out the window. So probably good that I don't pay too much attention to it. Now, the problem is I can see it. I can see the window, and now I'm going to be very aware of it, and I need to...
aware of the window at all times. Yeah, it's going to be an interesting one, because normally I would be pulling questions from chat into separate doc and all that, but we're kind of flying by the seat of our pants today. So if Dan is distractible, and if I'm distractible, we are paying attention, just in our own unique ways.
Yeah.
But yeah, make sure to check some of that out. There is a word, well, 2 words actually. Listen, math is not my strong suit, but there were 2 words that I said earlier that you might not know what they are, which is digital accessibility. If you're wondering, Tina, what is digital accessibility?
Tina, what is digital accessibility?
Thank you so much for asking, Dan. What a wonderful question. Digital
Thought of it myself.
accessibility. I'm proud of you. Digital accessibility refers to the ability of people with disabilities or impairments to independently consume or interact with digital applications and content. So that could just be the web, the internet, mobile applications, anything digital, basically. Which leads us into the main topic of today, which is game accessibility, just kind of a sub thing from there. Let me see. Oh, super quick. Do you guys have an official Discord server? So we don't have an official Discord server for Unreal Engine that's like hosted by Epic, but there is Unreal Slackers. I think, or no, it's Unreal Source now. I believe it's been retitled to Unreal Source. But that is basically the biggest Unreal Engine Discord server you'll find. There's so many wonderful, incredible people in there. So if that's something you're interested in, check it out there. But what is game accessibility? Accessibility is the practice of making structural... I am reading this one, so I'm sorry if this sounds scripted, because it is. Accessibility is the practice of making structural and systemic changes to allow people of any ability to have equitable access to all aspects of life. In the case of games, specifically, this means designing games so a broader range of players and people can experience and play them, right? Which brings us to the next main question, right? Why does this matter? Well, besides just morally it being the right thing to do, you know, it is something that affects a lot of people, probably more people than you would actually even consider. For example, I myself am colorblind. So I am protonomalous, which is considered, you know, part of accessibility. I'm protonomalous colorblind. That means that I am missing some of my red cones. I cannot see the full spectrum of red. I can see some reds, but a vast majority of them I cannot. So, as an artist, that has led to some very interesting experiences in my lifetime thus far. But it's also unfortunate in that red is both a very common and usually very important color used in game design, namely when something is dangerous. So I end up getting myself into a lot of situations that would be obvious for most people to not get into, but it's not for me, because I'm just like, oh wow, look at this barrel here. There's nothing dangerous about this whatsoever, and then I explode and it's awful. But you know, that's just one example. Both of my parents are also disabled in different ways. My father is also a huge avid gamer, and there's a lot of things that are just really difficult for him. He's very visually impaired. So if stuff is too fast, like too fast paced, it's difficult for him to catch up, to make sure he's caught all the details of what's going on. You know, things like that. It can range from small things to big things. But that's, of course, from the moral standpoint. I'm out of breath. Why am I? I'm yelling into the microphone. Wow.
No, it's all good. It's all good points. And the colorblind one I think is interesting because I don't know the actual stat on this. I kind of wish I had it offhand, but I know many people who've gone like 10, 20, 30 years of their life and not realizing that they had some form of color deficiency or auditory deficiency or things like that. You know, it's just, that's just the way life is for you. You don't really know until you end up in a situation where somebody points it out in most cases, where it's like, oh yeah, you know, actually I didn't realize that that's different for you. And I maybe I'm not seeing or hearing or whatever, the same things or the same ranges as other people.
Absolutely. And there's also, besides it potentially being something that takes a while for people to realize about themselves, I have a funny story about that I'll say in a second, but also people can develop these kinds of disabilities or accessibility issues later in life. It might not be something that they're necessarily born with. It could be something that just develops of its own accord, whether through age, through sicknesses or accidents, or even just sometimes they just happen without there being necessarily a cause for it. So it's stuff that, you know, is easy to forget about and not consider. But
You know, it's a great point too. I didn't always need these, and now if I want to read, these are required. Like that is just a new thing that I have to have now. So there was a good stint in my life where I'm like, I didn't think of myself as somebody who wears glasses, and now there's people I've known their whole time knowing me. They're like, yeah, you're the guy with the glasses, and I'm just like, yeah, I guess I am now.
A couple things I want to talk about from chat super quick before I have my funny story. I'll do super quick, I promise. It'll be quick, quick, and then we'll get into the actual stuff. But Turnicog, first of all, Unreal Engine said this would be chill, 20 minutes and they're shouting. There's gonna be more too. I lied. I want it to be chill, but I am innately not a chill person. So we'll do our best, okay? And then also follow-up question, how can we Tina-proof our red barrels? That is actually a great question, and we'll talk a little bit more about it later as well, but not just relying on colors for things. So if there is a red barrel that is a red color that I cannot perceive, if there's like a skull and crossbones or like a warning label or something on it, then I can much more easily, you know, as long as I took the time, I guess, to actually read and comprehend whatever is on this barrel, then I know, oh, this is dangerous. So adding like symbols or things like that, besides just relying on color for mechanics or necessary things like that, helps a lot.
Symbols are
But
a great way. Yeah, great way to do that.
Yeah, for sure. The funny story. Okay, so this is about me, right? With you being like, people could go 20 or 30 years of their life without realizing. So I have been colorblind my whole life, but it never came up in the capacity where it really mattered until I went to college for game art, right? And one of our assignments was, we had a lighting course where we had to try and match the picture that our instructor gave us as close to 1-to-1 as possible. And I did that for sure. I was like, this is as close as you could possibly get. This looks like I just took a screenshot of the photo that I was provided. This is impeccable, 10 out of 10. I deserve something greater than an A, for certain. And then I turn it in, and I got an absolutely awful grade on it. I was so upset that I actually like physically barged into where the instructor was. And I was like, listen, what is this? What is this nonsense? I did perfect. You can't dispute that. And he was like, yeah, I mean, the levels of it were great. Positioning was great and all of that. But the color is not even close. And straight up, because I used grayscale because I thought the image was grayscale. I was like, what color? What are you on about? What are you talking about? And that is how I discovered I was colorblind, by arguing with my instructor over my grade. But, you know, it's fine. If that's not an allegory for most of my life, honestly, I don't know what
Yeah, and that's usually when things like that come up. Like, it's not often that you're just going to be like, oh, I don't know, we're both looking at an apple and like, are you sure that's the same color apple, Missy? Like it's usually in situations like that where you were asked to do something specific or find something specific, and then there's a discrepancy there. That's when it's like, okay, wait, hold on.
Yeah, definitely. But all of that aside, we'll get into the actual content for today. So besides it being important morally, also with you all as developers, whether you're making your own game, working with a team making a game, or even just a hobbyist doing projects and stuff like that on the side, something to consider when it comes to accessibility is from the business standpoint. And I hate to bring it there, but it is something to consider. These stats that I'm about to talk about are straight from the CDC. We can actually pull up a fun little infographic that they have on their website. If I give Dan a second here. Unless, oh no, did my internet go down? Wait, Dan, are you frozen or am I frozen?
It might be me. Hello?
I hear you, but I don't see you.
My Zoom has become very, very upset.
Uh-oh.
1 second here.
Okay, well, we don't need the website for now. I could just talk
Here,
about it.
let me fade to it.
Oh.
And then I'll use this opportunity while you're talking about this beautiful graphic to figure
Okay.
out what's happening on my end.
Honestly, the frozen face that you're on isn't terrible. You look very interested in what it is that I'm talking about. So we could leave it. It's fine.
All right.
But yeah, so these stats, first of all, are just for the United States exclusively. These are not global stats, so they could differ. The further out you pull the words, the further out you pull the words. Oh, it's just OBS. I'm so scared. But in the US, 1 in 4 adults have a disability of some kind. And technically, it's actually a little bit more than that. It's 27% of the adult population, but 1 in 4 is a little bit easier to visualize. And that is literally, you know, a fourth of your entire potential customer base that is completely alienated from your product if you have no means of allowing them to access or play your game. And that's not insubstantial when it comes to especially profit margins or just the marketplace at large. If you are offering the exact same product, well, not exact same, but a similar product, either genre otherwise, to another studio or person or whatever, and they have that accessibility feature that yours doesn't, that is automatically a fourth of that player base that is going to this other product because they can't access yours. So that is definitely something to consider when you're going into this. Now, this is also not me being like, you need to have the highest level of accessibility, Last of Us 2 levels straight out of the gate, because Naughty Dog has had like well over a decade to improve upon their tools. So the purpose of today is mostly for indie devs or smaller teams or people who are looking for that place of where to start. Because I think all of us in general agree that accessibility is important for one reason or another, but we don't all know where to start or where to begin that process. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Is we've compiled literally on my notes here, it's just called The List and it's bolded. So we've compiled the list for you today.
The list TM.
Yes,
TM.
And it's compiled from a bunch of different resources and also many other people who are far more knowledgeable than both either Dan or me. So I'm sorry. I should have spoken for myself. But we'll be dropping links to those as we go through in case any of this is stuff that you're interested in, you want to learn more about, dig a little bit deeper into. We'll be dropping those resources for you. But for today, we've compiled the list. We should have set up like a soundboard for this or something.
Hindsight is 2020. Yeah.
Zoom
The
in.
list. It's just like this big text.
Exactly. Oh my gosh. All right,
Let's
me catch
dive
up on
in.
chat. Let's do it. Let's do it. Let me catch up on chat too, just to make sure that
Let's catch up on
I'm
chat.
not ignoring anyone.
Then we'll
I
dive.
swear. Yeah. Jeez, Dan.
Gotta build up the anticipation, right?
Yeah. Jumping the gun here.
Sorry, I'm just so excited.
Thank you, Akels from Twitch. They said, just in case you think you've got gray lipstick on, you've got red. Sometimes I'm not certain because I lean a little bit into the goth persuasion, if you couldn't tell. So I do own gray and black lipsticks, and sometimes I'm like, is what I think is happening? I don't know. All right, moving on into the list.
The list.
Okay, so first and foremost, let me just grab this quick little link. It is for, in general, game accessibility guidelines. Now, they have varying levels of these guidelines depending on how intense you want to go. There's basic, there's not basic. Let me open the link. They have basic, intermediate, advanced, and full list. So you can kind of pull bits and pieces from these guidelines based off of what works for you and your project. But this is a great place to start if you're just looking for kind of general recommendations. All right. First up from our list, not their list. It is in their list, but this is ours. Is allow all controls to be remapped. So why this is important, this allows for players who need to use special controllers, for example, to play your game, as well as just accommodating preferences of all players. And this brings us into another thing with accessibility, where I think it's easy to assume that these sorts of features are exclusively for people who are disabled in some way, which is not true. A lot of people will end up using these same features, whether just for preferences or things that they preferences or things that they prefer.
I'm glad you distinguished between the two there.
Thank you.
It's important.
It's hard to tell the difference sometimes, so I thought I would really reiterate. And we'll go into this in just a moment as well, but a great example that is like subtitles. A lot of people who don't necessarily require subtitles because they're not hard of hearing or anything like that will still have them on because they're useful and helpful. There's stats for that too that I have, but I'm going to save that for the actual subtitle section.
I'd like to jump in just really briefly too, just to say like accessibility, it doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be accessible, as Tina said, to someone who has a sort of disability. Accessibility can be preferences. Like, great example for me. If you have key rebinding in your game on a PC or on a controller or anything like that, that is a huge selling point to me. FOV, including on console, is a huge selling point to me. I don't have any inherent disability that makes me require that, but there is extreme preference in the field of view and what I'm able to see that can be a deal breaker for someone like me, who's just like a general everyday guy. So those are really big things. Subtitles are huge for me. I have been raised on subtitles. They're just a thing I like to have. I'm not reading them constantly, but it could happen where I miss a word and then I can easily glance down and be like, oh, that was the word I missed. Or I love video games. This also happens in movies. Sometimes audio mixing is just not done very well. And you're trying to listen to what your companion is saying, and there's 50,000 guns firing at the same time, and you can't understand a single word they're saying. It's a very good, nice thing for me to be like, oh, okay, that is what she said under the sound of that 50 cal. Makes sense. Got it. Like,
this is the context.
Yeah, those are really beneficial tools for everybody. It doesn't even have to be just what I think a lot of people typically think of when they think accessibility. Why Fallout 4 got jump on Y? I want that to be on A, please. Thank you. So to be able to like switch those things up is huge for somebody like me. It's just a preference. Like, I prefer to, and so used to using this thing. It's just a good tool for people like me to make the gamer happy. At the end of the day, that's what you want, right? You want the gamer to be happy. So little things like that, they make the gamer happy.
Oh, it took me by surprise. I'm actually crying for that one. Why Fallout got jump on why? I don't know. Great question, Dan.
Someone get Todd Howard on the phone. I need to talk to this man.
Asking the hard questions. But yeah, that's part of remapping. Of course, is preferences, and also it helps a lot with because there are very specific controllers that a lot of other companies make to help out people with different kinds of like physical disabilities that they may have. Another thing, why is my monitor turning off? Everything is falling
That's what
apart.
happened here. The computer I'm using for Zoom went to sleep, and it caused OBS to crash. So that's why I disappeared. I have the separate mouse here. I'm just going to wiggle it every once in a while so that it doesn't go to sleep, and we should be okay.
There you go. There you go. Yeah, if my face looks less lit occasionally, it is just because my monitor has decided to turn off in the middle of this. It's fine. Nobody panic. Everything is fine.
I also just want to quickly shout out, you're playing Baldur's Gate 3, and all your mates are screaming about the loot during the dialogue. Yes. Great, another great example of when those are good to have the subtitles for.
Yeah, for sure. Another thing that I feel kind of falls under this category of remapping controls is also allowing, how do I say this? Replacing actions
can help a lot too. So
Mhm.
Dan, when we were talking about this before, you actually had a great example of if a game has an option where you have to like button mash, repeatedly hit a button to do a certain action. If there is an option in the settings to change that to just hold instead of having to mash, for example, that is also something that is incredibly helpful for a lot of people.
And I use it every single chance I get. Like button mashing, it's okay, it's fine, but to me this isn't an engaging way of doing gameplay. Like for me, gameplay is about making decisions and choices and being precise and stuff like that. And this is just like, how fast can you do this? And it's like, I mean, that's cool and all, but it's also really monotonous. And even if I do this as fast as I think I possibly can and I still fail, then I'm just annoyed. It's not like I'm like, oh, I clearly wasn't good enough. It's like, come on, man, it's as fast as I can go. What do you want from me? Like, it's nice to be able to just be like, and okay, and we're done. It's very
Yeah. Like I'm doing the best I can. Yeah. I do know there was something you wanted to chat about in regards to this, right, Dan, with some of these adaptive controllers that are out on the market.
Yeah. There's a lot of options for games that just don't offer keybinds. Like it's just something that they don't have. I mean, sometimes on PC they don't even allow that, which is a huge faux pas. Developers, let's not do that. But you know, we're seeing more and more games having rebinds on consoles, which is great. We're seeing obviously a ton on PC and things like that. But there are other, you know, tools that you can use as a player. Like right now we're talking about, you know, for the developer perspective, and I would strongly suggest any developer do key rebinds. It's not very hard. And it's a huge quality of life thing that goes a long way for quite a few people. You'd probably be surprised how many people actually do rebind. But there's also options like Microsoft has their adaptive controller. Another example is also, again, Microsoft, is there's actually software where you can rebind directly in the controller itself. So the game input will still say press Y, but you could make, you know, this button here or X, or even the thumbstick click in BY. So there are other ways that you can have, you know, rebound controls, even if it's not offered in a game. But as a developer, I strongly encourage adding those sorts of features because, again, it's not terribly hard. It doesn't take a lot of time. It's pretty simple, and it's a huge quality of life thing that makes things so much easier for me. Even in some games, I'll only rebind like a key or two, but just those two meant I go from, hey, I'm just having fun with the game and I'm not thinking about it, to being like, I keep hitting the wrong key or button, and then I get frustrated. And obviously you don't want that with your games.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Yeah. And there's a good point I saw, I think it was Twitch chat. Let me scroll up. Uncivil Throne, fantastic name, by the way. I love QTE, but I opted out as my arthritis buddy loathes them. And yeah, that's a great example too of, oh my god. Actually,
and what's great about
just
them
thinking about QTE mashing with arthritis is harrowing.
And what's great about these is that the whole point is that they're options, right? Like you could still be like, hey, you know what? I really do think that, you know, the button QT mashing, whatever it is that you're doing, is important to my game. And I want that to be the default experience. But for those who can't or just would really prefer not, giving them that option doesn't mean like I can't do this with my game, but giving them the option to have that if they want it or need it is great. You're just making it easier for everybody who wants to play your game.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something I really want to highlight that you just said. The point of it being an option, is a lot of these are not things that you necessarily have to have enabled by default. There's not really a downside to having a lot of these enabled by default either, but you don't have to. So if you have your gameplay very specific in mind, you can still develop towards that and then just have some of these accessibility features as things that people can either opt into or out of. Because again, this is so that more people can experience your project. And if you want to experience in a specific way, you should still do that. Make the game of your dreams that you want to make and that you're passionate about. This is just a way to get more people involved and be able to actually experience what you've made. So don't think of it as like a a make or break where it has to be enabled at all times. All these different mechanics have to balance together. You can have options where people pick one or the other, and it just adjusts their play style for what fits them better in their circumstances. All right.
Exactly.
On to the next of the list.
The list.
Add closed captioning for all dialogue and important sound effects too. So this allows the player with reduced hearing or no hearing to play your game, right? It also provides help to those playing either just in loud environments. If you have a lot going on, I think any of us that grew up in a household with siblings probably has had their sibling being loud and obnoxious while they are trying to pay attention to something in the background, or just being in places where you can't have the sound on for one reason or another, or even for those who may not speak the language that the game is in natively fluently. So also having different language options for these subtitles. These are all reasons to have closed captioning, and why I specifically had important sound effects included in there is, again, there may be experiences that lend very important context clues to what's happening either in the narrative or gameplay itself, that if you're hard of hearing or you have the volume turned off for whatever reason, you won't have that context, and then you don't understand what's happening, and it pulls you out of the immersion of that experience. So, if you're walking down a corridor with your buddies, this is an example and not pulled directly from a video game. Okay.
Yeah, everything we've said so far has been hypothetical. None of this has been real world
for
experience.
sure, absolutely. But if you're walking down a corridor with some of your space friends, just friends, and then they start freaking out because there was an explosion that happened behind you, you would have no context for why everyone is upset until you turn around to see what is happening, right? So if you just continue down that corridor, you wouldn't know what's happening.
Yeah.
I have not had this happen to me before. This is hypothetical.
Well, it can also be important even down to just like specific mechanics, like, with like a lock-picking minigame or something like that. On a controller, you can do some haptic feedback with like vibration and stuff like that, but you don't really get that on a mouse and keyboard. And there's other ways that you could do it with like other visual cues, but even just as something as simple as it saying click once the pin has actually done. If you can't hear it, or you have your audio down, or you're trouble hearing, or whatever reason, if you're playing games at night and everybody's trying to sleep. Again, hypothetical situation. I never did that at 12, Mom. Good, tools to have for people in those very specific hypothetical situations.
Yeah, exactly. Or like Esfrect said, like loud click in parentheses as you trigger a trap, for example.
Oh, there
or
you go.
Like
really
that.
Great. Yep.
Turnip Cog had a question here. Should we get our sound effects subtitles localized? I would. If it's a description of it, then it should be localized. But if it's I forget what they're called, but words that sound, that are like they're spelt as they sound, like boom, for example. Boom is one of those words. I forget what they're called.
I know which word. I
if
know what
anybody knows what I'm talking about, please tell me in chat, because this is gonna bother me.
I got onomatopoeia in my head, and that's not right. It's a similar thing, but it's not the same thing. And now, because I have that in my head and everybody else has it in their heads now, nobody's gonna get it.
Yeah.
Save us, chat, and I'm sorry also.
Save us. But yeah, I would get sound effects subtitles localized as much as possible too, if that's within your budget too. Something to consider. Got a question from YouTube here from Andromeda. How would you deal with situations where the direction of the sound matters as much as the caption itself, like for an arena shooter or the like? So we actually have an example of this in Fortnite. It's a visual audio cue, and it's part of the UI, right? Where whatever direction a sound is coming from, there is a visual cue on your screen based on which direction that happened from. And that is one example of how you could handle something like that. And that could be either, like an aura from that direction, or a sort of sound wave looking thing. Those are examples. There's There's tons of other probably much more creative and experimental ways of implementing this than I could think of at that moment. But that's an actual example that we have that I could think of for a situation like that.
Yeah,
but those are some ways.
Yeah, it could be as simple as also kind of like in the same vein as like a damage indicator, where you just kind of have that like half circle that just kind of exists on your screen, kind of directing you towards wherever the sound cue is coming from.
Yeah. Dan, you were right. It was an onomatopoeia.
What?
Yeah. Chat coming in for the rescue.
Oh, heck yeah.
Good job, Dan.
Now I want to know what other word my brain was thinking that it was thinking that was clearly not correct.
Oh, no. This is not the existential crisis for you today. We need to
All right.
pull it in.
Bring it back.
Another question here for volume. Do you have any examples of being able to lower volume for those who hear too well? Oh, that's interesting, actually. I think so. A lot of games already implement this, but having sliders that can affect different parts of the audio. Dan, you're an audio guy, so you could probably answer this better than me, but having the master volume and then, being able to affect voices or sound effects or things separately probably helps if like a specific thing is bothering them, but I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I would say sliders are the easiest way to go. Like you could do presets that kind of try to, take in notes of like people's different sort of, situations. But that again is kind of a lot more work on you. And it's also maybe unintentionally you don't get the preset that you want. Sliders are the best way to go, and put a fair few of them. You don't want to, you don't necessarily have to inherently overwhelm, but yes, sound effects, separated out is really important from voiceover. Some people will just say, well, here's just cinematic volume. That doesn't really help because you're going to turn everything down in the cinematic in that thing. So being able to split out voices versus music versus sound effects. And then if sound effects are important, make sure that you can isolate sort of that sort of thing too. Like we were talking about footsteps. If footsteps are really important in your game, make sure that can be its own isolated slider, because if you're like, hey, I'm having trouble hearing the dialogue and, for whatever reason, the door opening and closing is way too loud, that could be considered sound effects and then have, footsteps be isolated. Sliders are easily the easiest way to go. And again, this is just a preference thing for me, because oftentimes I feel like mixes can be a little dense, and I struggle specifically with words. Pretty much any game I go into, that if there's sliders, master volume will stay there, but everything other than voiceover or dialogue goes down like 3 notches, just inherent. Just because that lets the dialogue stand out over all the ambient or gunfire or whatever else is happening in the game.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. A couple suggestions real quick for you, Dan, just so you don't think about this for the next several hours. A couple options that we've gotten here. One, Julia from our wonderful modding team thinks it might be alliteration they were thinking of, or from chat, Esfract was thinking it might be palindrome that you were considering, like kayak or race car, where the word is the same flipped.
Yeah. No, it wasn't palindrome. Palindrome's another good one, but it wasn't that one. Yeah.
You're gonna realize what it was at like 3 a.m. in a cold sweat, and yeah.
If I remember it, you'll just see a random comment in the VOD that just says, "It was this."
Yes, and we realized what it was far too late. All right, next thing in the list.
The list.
We have to say it this way every time now, because if we don't, it's a continuity issue.
List.
Yes, that's the one. That's the one. I hope you're ready to say that another.
No, it's going to be different every time.
Oh, okay. I'm cool with that. That works too.
Mix it up.
Yes. So next thing here is provide documentation in an accessible format such as HTML or plain text. So this specifically applies, in my opinion, to things like tutorials or command selections, or even if you have a transcript, if you have audio in your game, like a story or a narrative, if you have a separate document available when people download your game that has a transcript of the script available in HTML or plain text, this is really, really good for people who need to use screen readers. So this allows documentation to be translated directly by screen readers for those who are of low or no vision. PDFs and images obviously are not accessible in this same way. So that's why specifically have HTML or plain text in there. And screen readers, if you don't mind me going into that a little bit more too, Dan. I think we're seeing a lot more screen reading recently. I know the main example I can think of is actually Helldivers 2. They had screen reading on by default when you first boot up the game, which I thought was awesome because then, it's on if you don't like it. The option was a couple pages later where you could turn it off. But if you think about it, most of the time the people who require something like screen reading, it's going to be really difficult for them to go through a list and menus to find that option for an internally built screen reader. So having something like that on by default is really helpful for people that struggle with those kinds of things.
Yeah.
Just something to consider.
I think a lot of Ubisoft titles are pretty well known for that too, having that kind of on by default. At least the recent ones have been, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is just something I find that super considerate design myself. So it's something to consider if you're looking into adding a screen reader to your project.
I think it's great. It does take me by surprise, unfortunately, because it is so rare. Like a game will just start and then just start talking to me, and I'm like, "Whoa, hello!"
Mm-hmm.
But then it's really nice because it's like, "Oh yeah, cool." I like that that's actually there, because if I was visually impaired or anything like that, like you said, it would be a great way to be able to navigate the menus, which is pretty important in a game.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, my headset just died what is happening?
It's
every single tech issue we can have, we're having. All right.
Well, thankfully I can't be responsible for that one. That one, I'll take all the other ones.
Are you getting, okay, I just have you coming through my speaker. Are you hearing yourself? Are you getting an echo?
Nope. So far so good.
Sick. All right. Well, if it does happen later, let me know. We'll figure it out. The tech is revolting. Yes, it is. They're on strike, honestly. Okay. But yeah, so that's if you have a screen reader just integrated directly into your project, having it enabled by default is a great place to start. And then if you don't have a screen reader integrated into your project, that's where having a separate documentation that has that HTML or plain text would be helpful, because then they can just use a third-party screen reader instead and go through kind of as it's going. So stuff to keep in the noggin. Next on the list. We have provide assist modes such as auto-targeting, training options, tutorials, low-stake tutorials, things like that. These kinds of things help players with accessibility needs that can be leveraged to help teach the game and new players. So it helps others get a chance to try out the gameplay without the intensity of actually being in the moment, to see first if they do need to remap any of their controls, set up hotkeys on their own controllers that they may have, things like that. While also, like I said, serves the dual purpose of just teaching your players how to play your game, which is an entirely different conversation in and of itself.
Yeah.
But having, those assist modes or training options and things help a lot with stuff like that.
I feel like training options are especially beneficial in like online games or like competitive things like that, where it's like, there isn't a single player option where you can go in and be a goof and, work out all the kinks. But even in single player, I think they're very nice to have. But especially if you're doing an online thing, having some sort of either dedicated mode that they can go in where it's just them and maybe a couple of bots or whatever, you need to do, or having a dedicated part in the menu where they can go in and see those sorts of things. Usually it's better to let them get in and actually be able to do it than to have it written. But at the bare minimum, having it written is very important, especially for someone like me who has a terrible tendency of starting a game, playing half of it, and then coming back 4 years later and having no idea what I'm doing, and it's not going to tutorialize at that point. So I either have to restart or just brute force it. So it's good to have for things like that too.
Yeah, for sure. There's actually, let me double check, but I'm pretty sure you had a thing you wanted to go through on this, because a great example of like specifically assist modes or things like that is Last of Us 2. And they had a really great, yeah, here it is. They have a great breakdown of all of the different things of accessibility that they've done. But I really like this section that goes specifically into their assist modes.
Yeah, The Last of Us 2 is like one of the highest bars in terms of accessibility, I think. But this is a good resource, even if you're not, familiar with Last of Us, or you're doing a different kind of game, or any sort of situation like that, is to read through this, because in a lot of instances, you don't know what you don't know, right? So you might see something in here and be like, oh, you know what? That's a great idea of an assist tool to have that would make great sense for my game that I never even once considered. This has, I mean, they do a pretty great overview down to like the different things they do, input remapping, control scheme, whatever. So if you're not familiar with this as a developer, this is a great resource, I would say, just to peer at and just see what the different sort of things, tap or hold for repeated button press, melee combos, aiming mode, toggle or hold, listen mode, certain things like that you may not have even considered. It's a great resource just to see, what sort of options there are out there.
Yeah. And I think I mentioned it before too. Like, this is definitely not a conversation where we are expecting you to turn around and have the same level of accessibility in your games as Naughty Dog does, because they've had like a decade to perfect this. But it's a great place to learn what's possible and what has already happened.
Yeah, they had a whole team and a lot of money. So again, this is like the creme de la creme, top tier things. But there's a lot of things that you don't have to, like Tina said, do all of it. But if you do some, that's way better than none.
Yeah, definitely. And then another thing, the mods are already on top of it, and they've got the links in chat there. But Control as well by Remedy is a fantastic example of a game with assist modes to help players that might need it for especially the combat in that game. I think literally in the thumbnail there was a review that said Control was like the gun Dark Souls of games. And so they put in some assist modes where it's really, really good, really in depth, to the point where I personally feel like you could actually just go through the game basically without having to interact with the combat even at all, with the level of assist modes that they've added to it, which is great for me because, wow, my aim is not great.
I saw that monitor go.
Yeah, it's fine. Don't worry about it. It's back. We're back.
Don't draw attention to it.
But yeah, stuff like that is also helpful, again, for players that aren't even necessarily disabled or need assistance because of that, but they might just not be good at that particular kind of gameplay. Skill issue, the kids might call it. me. I have a skill issue with just about every game that I play.
No, you're wonderful gaming. At platformers.
Thank you. Thank you.
And
I
other
felt
games
the
as well.
sincerity of that.
Yeah. It's a weird specific thing. I don't know why I specified that one specifically.
Yeah, I love games, but I'm a terrible gamer. So, assist modes help me out a lot because I want to experience it. And I love the stories that a lot of people put into their projects and their games. But if I get stuck on the same boss for eternity, there's a point where I just have to stop for my own sake. So being able to work around situations like that, and that's just coming from my perspective as someone who's just not good at playing. I can't even imagine how frustrating that experience might be for someone where there is an actual physical limitation that's keeping them from being able to progress in a game that they're really enjoying or that they want to see more of. So definitely something to kind of consider, whether that just be
and I want to whatnot. Yeah, and I want to tie that back actually a little bit to something you said towards the beginning, which is that disabilities can also form over time. And not even really necessarily if you would know if you classify this as a disability, but something that definitely happens as you get older is that your reaction times just get worse. Your brain just ain't as good as being fast as it once did be. And I am feeling that. Like, I have gone careening into my 30s, just losing all the skill that I've developed over the past 20 years with video games, where things that I used to be able to do no problem, I'm just like, man, I am struggling now. Like, I can feel that. And being able to include people as they get older. Again, I'm only in the 30s, like as you get in your 40s and older, that just continues to get a little bit less, responsive as time goes on. So these accessibility features can also include people who've been gaming their whole lives and would love to continue to experience games.
Yeah. Man, it wasn't a personal attack, but it felt like one. So
Wait, which one?
The reaction time. Just like
no, that's
losing
me.
reaction
That's
time
me
as you get
completely.
older.
Oh.
No,
Man.
I know. That was, man, it's rough. It's rough out here. Okay. But this whole talk about, auto targeting and training options kind of leads also directly into the next point of the list.
List.
I'm really excited for when people tune into the stream halfway through and they see us just go the list for the first time and have no context and are confused and then leave. Like Dragon Spirit.
Yeah, exactly.
Welcome
like me.
to,
Welcome to the list.
Welcome to the list, Dragon Spirit. Anyway, so the next thing on I can't even say it normal anymore. The next item is provide a range of difficulty levels. So this not only caters to all players, kind of like we were just talking about, but also allows those with accessibility needs to play at difficulty levels that may not be as intense or demanding for them. And Dan, before anyone in chat can ask you this question, I'm just going to ask you this question because it's a hard one and we're going to get it out of the way.
All right.
I love everyone in chat who's just like, the list.
The list.
But the question I have for you, Dan.
I came for the knowledge, I stayed for the list.
Yeah. My question for you is, what do you do if you are specifically making a game that is hard? Like, the point of it is that the game is freaking hard. What do you do? Tell me. Walk me through it.
Panic and stay off Twitter.
Okay.
Yeah, no. So that's a tough one, and there's smarter people than me. See, I got to say it this time, Tina. Who are still trying to figure out the best way to handle something like that. I hate to dive into this, but there's the Dark Souls get good. Don't make my game easy, because the whole point is that is really dang hard. And I think the reason that it's such a debate is that it's a really hard thing to answer, because there is absolutely merit in the fact that something is challenging, that surmounting it is an achievement. That's the kind of point of that. The point is that it's difficult.
Mm-hmm.
But when you make it difficult, you are inherently excluding many people, not even just people with disabilities, average gamers, new gamers, that sort of range. Tinas, specifically all Tinas. So that's kind of a hard thing to sort of navigate, because you can't have both inherently, right? Like to make something quote unquote easier, then arguably now maybe might hinder that sort of challenge that was there inherently. I think it's going to come down to kind of not person to person, but like game to game sort of thing. But one that I really liked as an option is Celeste. So Celeste, for those who are not familiar, is a 2D platformer that is very, very great. I'm speaking as me saying that. It is very great, and you should definitely play it. But what I like about it is that it is really hard. And that maybe I shouldn't say I like what about it is it's really hard. It is really hard. And what I like about it is that they do offer some accessibility features down to adjusting game speed, infinite stamina, air dashes, dash assists, so that there's a little bit of, kind of I think of it as the Wile E. Coyote thing, where you can jump even after you've fallen off the thing. Like there's some like wiggle room in terms of like what it'll accept as, yes, you did that properly. But what they straight up say is they have these options for you, but when you go to turn on these assist modes, there's a dialogue that comes up. And I'm going to read the dialogue because I think it's really great. The assist mode allows you to modify the game's rules to fit your specific needs. This includes options such as slowing the game speed, granting yourself invincibility or infinite stamina, and skipping chapters entirely. So if you get to a place and you're just stuck, but you want to see the rest of the game, okay, you can skip it if you want. Celeste is intended to be a challenging and rewarding experience. If the default game proves inaccessible to you, we hope that you can still find that experience with assist mode. So again, the default is that this is a tough as nails challenging experience. But if you need, then you have these options to go through and experience the game in a way that you can actually experience it in. And I think that's, for most instances, a really good middle ground. Now, that's not going to solve the people and be like, well, then that means if you beat Celeste that you ruined my experience because I beat it harder. And it's like, well, there's really not a way to solve that I know of. Again, smarter people are having these sorts of conversations, and I think are making good progress in there. But I think that it is a solid middle ground, really, to allow for both.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's there's other things that you could consider for difficulty as well. There was a great comment from Andromeda in the YouTube chat there, where they said, I think it's important to know one's own game and what the challenge of the game truly is, and then focus on accessibility on things that might get in the way of engaging with that, which is really true, because all projects are going to differ from each other in one way or another. So how one game is difficult is not going to be the same for another. So yeah, being really cognizant of what kind of experience you're building and being aware of what parts of it are either intended or otherwise might just have ended up becoming the most challenging parts of it. So I know for a lot of games that are like horde, like wave horde games, for example, a great way to change the difficulty level of those is having varying degrees of intelligence for your AI, for your creatures. You can have some that are really, really scary and can calculate based off of your player's previous movements, like where they might be. They actually use cover or things like that, where instead you could choose how difficult you actually want that character AI to be in combat. So things, there's varying ways to change the difficulty for your game. And we could go through and list off like a bajillion hypotheticals for it. Sure. It would still never cover everything. This is definitely one of those things where you, as the builder of your game, would have the best perspective of what the challenge is and how to best approach it. But it's just something, this is more of a button point of like, just keep it in mind while you're developing. What is hard, what's intended to be hard, and also through playtesting, what have players found to be difficult, and then how can you go from there to making this gameplay more accessible to other players.
Yeah, and I want to echo something there too, because this is great for accessibility, but it's also great for just design in general, and that's what you kind of said, which is adjusting the quote-unquote intelligence of your AI. I think in a lot of game situations, they'd be like, all right, so we got normal mode, and then we have hard mode. And what hard mode does is it doubles the enemy's health, and it doubles the damage they do. And that's all. And that's harder, for sure, but it can also end up being harder in a way that feels really cheap, and it doesn't feel like you're going against a fair opponent. You're going against an unfair opponent, which maybe the design is the point in that. But really, a better way is you can have damage modifiers and health modifiers, and I think those can be important, but affecting, like Tina said, the intelligence. How aggressive are the enemies? How many times, if it's a shooter, do they shoot in a burst? How often are they shooting? How many enemies are you fighting in that thing? And now this does, that sort of thing, especially how many, can make, development times a little bit longer because you're now having to play test a bunch of different scenarios. But if you can do it, you will have a much more interesting game on higher difficulties, and you'll have a much more fair experience for, people who want to play on a lower thing where it's just like, well, I don't want to just like one shot every enemy because they got no health, but it would be interesting, but it would be very interesting for me to engage with a few less enemies that maybe are a little less aggressive so that I can have time to react or, navigate or do whatever it is that I want to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There was a really good comment here from Leo in Twitch who said, I always liked hard mode introducing new move sets and attack patterns, thus increasing the skill bracket versus just, bigger number. Which, is definitely also a way of approaching that, having like a whole move set that doesn't even occur until you're at like intermediate or hard or whatever mode. And I also like that because in some ways it can encourage like a replayability too for people that can go up to those higher difficulty levels. Because then it's like a whole new boss fight when they go through again. They don't just remember the exact same move set and this is the time I have to dodge here, and it makes it a fresh experience for them too.
A hard mode that I absolutely love is actually Madhouse difficulty in Resident Evil 7, because in that one, they're just like, all right, you've played the normal difficulty. This one, limited saves, which is already stressful, but all items and enemies are different places and spots, and everything is remixed. So now you get that air of like, well, I don't know what to expect next, and you can balance it for it being harder. It's a very, very fun way of handling difficulty, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, let me go through chat here real quick. Another question from Leo here. How would one handle a boss style mechanic with regards to difficulty level? I'm guessing limited moveset and slower, more predictable patterns. That's definitely one way.
More telegraphing too is helpful.
Yeah.
If they're gonna do a big swing, then have them have a big wind up so it's coming.
Mm-hmm. Or even like, and this one might be a controversial opinion, we'll see, but like extending iframes between certain movesets based off of difficulty as well. I know, again, iframes is one of those like heated debate topics in game development, but it's certainly a tool that can be utilized when it comes to difficulty levels.
Yeah, and I think that those are really important ways of kind of tackling difficulty, because it doesn't just have to be a switch in a menu. I think allowing players to also kind of self-impose challenge is cool too, where it's like, yeah, you could wear this heavier armor that just makes you take way less damage or whatever like that, or you could also wear the light armor and move faster, and having those sorts of things where they can self-impose the difficulty is a good way of kind of helping with balance too.
Definitely. Next question I see here from Dragon Spirit. I've missed about an hour. Have you talked about accessibility for those who are blind or nearsighted / colorblind? We've actually not talked about it yet, so you haven't missed it. We'll be going into those topics soon. But for anyone else that might have hopped in a bit late, we also post all of our streams as videos later, so you can always go back and watch stuff in the beginning if you missed it. No worries. Those will be available on both our YouTube and Twitch channels at Unreal Engine. And then another quick question I see in a YouTube chat from How to Get Over the Rainbow. Will we ever be offered certification again? Yeah, certifications are open, I think, right now. Let me double check that. Don't quote me. Let me double check that. But we do still offer certifications. All right. So yeah, moving on for now into the next option from the list.
The list
is make interface fonts scalable. So to assist those with low vision and players who may have to sit far away from their screens. So, if you have like your TV in your living room or wherever, all the way across the room from where you have your couch set up even, So you have to sit far away from your screens, or even people who have smaller screens too, because we can't just assume that all players have giant flat screens. There's a lot of people that don't. And these are all different scenarios to consider when it comes to scalability of fonts. And this one's that one actually is a pretty light lift to add in to your game. And that would be for UI components as well as subtitles. Actually, so Ben Tails, who works at Epic, is fantastic. He does a lot of great stuff around accessibility, just out and about in the community as well. But he said something the other day that I fully agree with, that I think half of the battle with accessibility is just making good UI. And I think this falls under that same category. Having the option of scalable fonts for all of these UI components is baseline, in my opinion, one of the easiest and best ways of making that more accessible. Is just blowing up text size, simple, easy. And we'll talk about this also in the next point here, so I won't go too far into it, but scaling fonts, as well as the ability to either change the color of fonts or adding a background to your fonts too. So instead of just having everything see through straight to the game behind it, sometimes being able to just put up like a black box or something behind the text can also automatically make that more accessible to people, especially if contrast is something that helps them actually see. Sometimes subtle tones are difficult for them to actually discern between. So being able to manually set that sort of contrast and size can help jump over those hurdles very easily.
Yeah.
Anything you'd like to add, Dan?
I was just saying, being able to adjust the opacity of that black box is also very, very nice too, because sometimes it just being a straight black box can be kind of distracting because it's just this hunk of solid shape and kind of right in the middle of the UI. So being able to be like adjust the opacity, because some people might want just to be pretty subtle. Some people might want it to be a little bit more strong so that they can really distinguish the text. Again, a slider should be pretty simple. If you're making a game, you should be able to do a slider. So these are really low lift things that can go a long way for people.
Yeah, and that's kind of the hope for this list, is that most of these are kind of like entry level things to consider if you're taking some of the first steps into trying to make your game more accessible to other players. So there's definitely, all of these can be taken way further than we're talking about. This is more just to kind of start the conversation, get the ball rolling, get the cogs turning, get the...
Oh my gosh.
I lost it. I was on a roll and then I lost it.
I love it.
But this does lead in... Oh wait, actually, there's a really great suggestion in Twitch chat here from Anami Mouse, however you want to say it, but also spacing in font for dyslexia as well. Yes, that is a great addition. Thank you for adding that. All right, make sure I'm not missing anything.
This can also come up for like 8-bit style games or 16-bit style games where you make the font very much in that style, so it's very blocky. In some instances, especially if you're trying to stylize that font, it can also be very hard to read. So having an option, there was a game I've been sitting here trying to pull it out of my brain for the last 5 or 6 minutes and I can't think of it, but it was like that, where it was very stylized, everything was very chunky, kind of low res, low pixel density font, and they had an option where it just swapped that out for real font. It totally clashed with the quote-unquote style of the game, but it meant that anybody could read it because it was scalable and stuck out in comparison to the rest of the UI. So another great option of just something to have. Most people won't need that, but for those who do, it's really great, and again, shouldn't really be that hard to do.
Yeah, and hugely helpful for the people that could use it. So this next point from the list is within kind of the same the list.
Oh my god, get ASMR with it.
This falls kind of under the same branch, but allow for high contrast color schemes and or colorblind modes. So this, of course, helps with people with low vision for the contrast, like I was saying with the fonts earlier, as well as just generally increasing the readability of the game, plus making potentially very important aspects of your game actually visible for players who might just not see that part of the color spectrum. So like I said earlier, for anyone who wasn't here for it, I'm colorblind. I can't see. I think it's about 70% of reds. So colorblind assists help a lot, especially in regards to portions of a game that may be very, very color dependent. And I saw someone in the chat mention earlier that they had a game that was really focused around color schemes and stuff. And this is definitely something to consider for that. If color schemes or the ways colors play with each other is integral to how your game functions, definitely consider implementing colorblind modes so that anyone who might not see that section of colors is not just automatically exempt from being able to play your game. But there's a few different ways to handle this. So this is also, it's tricky. Contrast, generally speaking, is pretty easy to implement, especially, most of us have played games even now where in the beginning when you're setting the settings for your game, there's the, slide until you can barely see whatever image it is in the middle for contrasting how bright your whites are and how dark your blacks are. And having something like that is great. Again, not just for people who might require that contrast to see what's happening, but also just for people's hardware too. Monitors are not all made the same. Not all monitors display brightness equally. So even having contrast options is helpful for players that might just have old hardware or things like that as well. So something to consider. And then colorblind modes, this is where colorblind modes is a little trickier, right? The simplified version is, in theory, you can just throw like a simple post process on top that will alter how some colors look. It's not that easy for a full-fledged colorblind mode, but it's a place to start. That is a low-lift place to start the process. It's not foolproof by any means, but it's better, like Dan was saying before, it's better than having nothing. So if you're still looking into ways to better implement a colorblind mode, this is at least a good place to start or have as an option in the meantime. We have a couple different links here in regards to color blindness and ways of understanding how these different things might look for people with different versions of color blindness. I don't know if you wanted to pull that up or not.
Yeah, I'll pull it up really quick. I also just wanted to add right before we jumped into there too, is color blindness is kind of common. Like it's almost more common than I would have expected. According to the what I found here is it seems about like 8% of men have some form of color blindness. That's nearly 1 in 10.
Mm-hmm.
That's a fairly substantial amount of people that are going to have issues with color, playing your games. So as Tina said, there's a lot of like, lower lift things that you can do that can be really helpful in terms of, kind of accommodating for those different sorts of colorblind folks. Like Tina said, we have a few links here. There was something that I actually stumbled across a little while back that I thought it was a pretty good resource here. There was a GDC talk by Douglas Pennant that we'll link out for you guys to check out. It's on YouTube, so you can just watch it at any point. But he goes through and he has a whole talk just about the hidden. I think that's what he calls it, the hidden. Yeah, solving the invisible problem, designing for color blindness in games. And he goes through and he explains what color blindness is, the different kinds, and then some really cool, just like general considerations that you can do for, designing for color blindness in your games. So this is a great video to go ahead and check out, as well as some of the other resources that we'll go ahead and link out to. But this was really cool. I found it very, very fascinating. As somebody who I believe, as far as I can tell, sees most color pretty well. I find it very interesting to see the differences in the ways that people can look at the same stimuli and perceive it completely differently. I think it's really cool. So
definitely. And there is a point for sure. I do see in the Twitch chat here where Blizz Chaos mentioned that colorblind modes can't cover all of the spectrums, and that's true. This is definitely another one of those aspects of accessibility, not just in gaming. This is also the same across all media. This is more of just like a digital accessibility thing. It can be improved vastly more than what we have right now in general. But there's things that we can do to at least start pushing in the right direction. And it'll improve over time too. But it's we do what we can. You know?
Yeah.
We do what we can. We're doing our best.
And accommodating for those that you can, is again better than not accommodating at all. So it's good to do as much as you feel like you can do.
Yeah. And then another comment that I saw that I think is a good thing to point out from Turning Cog here, was, would it be better to allow the highlight color to be able to just scroll up? I can read it, just scrolled away. Hold on, give me a second. Would it be better to allow the highlight color to be able to be changed so the important things are contrasted? Yeah, that's also a great way of handling something like that. And that would be helpful not just for colorblind people, but also low vision or pinpoint vision also. It helps a lot with things like that too. All right. Again, just double checking I'm not missing anybody. It's hard being the one talking a lot and following chat.
I know.
I have mad props for everyone who can do this seamlessly, for I am not one of them.
Let's give some mad props to Tina for her mostly seamless. For her mostly seamless.
Don't do that, actually. I will get embarrassed.
You're doing a great job, Tina.
Oh, shucks. Thanks, Dan.
You're welcome.
Let's see. So next up, this is for adding audio tags to all significant elements, including actors, doors, items, user interface elements, so on and so forth. This allows for those with low to no vision to play, as well as increasing the usability of the game, just kind of in general. There's great examples of like blind gamers playing different games solely based off of audio cues. So being able to have stuff like that helps a lot. And you kind of made an example of this earlier when you were talking about the lock picking, even where that audio cue of an audible click when you finish lock picking can help so they know they've completed the task. This is also, so we're kind of shifting mindsets, right? A lot of what we've talked about before has been visual, and this would be something that, if we're speaking purely from potential disability standpoint, things like this are really helpful, like I said, for people with low to no vision. So haptic feedback also helps out a lot in paired with these sorts of things. So that, a little shaking of the controller while you're trying to lock pick, so you know when the pick has tension on it or when it's about to break, if that's included in the game, for example. And then the most satisfying little click as you actually finish the lock and it opens, and it's, what a wonderful experience that is.
Yeah.
That player reward right there is incredible. But it's, having audio tags can also be included on, like if you have a backpack or an inventory, having the sound of like a jostling backpack as you open your inventory. So people have that audio cue of, I'm now in my inventory menu. Or another thing that is really helpful is if you have either the general game sound muted or completely covered by just different music when you go into your main menu versus when you're actually playing the game. Doors, squeaky doors. We don't believe in oiling our hinges in game development. Thank you very much. All doors are squeaky and terrible, and this is how it should be.
Yes.
Or if you're filtering through items, if you have potions, have a little sound when you pull out a potion of, liquid shaking in the bottle or glass clinking against each other. There's tons of different ways that you could implement this, and I actually view it as kind of fun, honestly, to think of these different kind of audio tags and cues that you can attach to all these different sorts of things. But I'd also love to hear your thoughts on this again, Dan, because you do a lot of audio work as well.
Yeah, no, I'm fascinated by Foley, so I think it's really interesting because there's a lot that goes into it, and it's one of I would say one of like the unsung heroes in game design. Like a lot of people will be like, oh man, the music is amazing, or the graphics are amazing, the story is so compelling and stuff like that. But I feel like Foley is kind of rarely noticed, mostly because it's just good and diegetic and it makes sense, and your brain just goes, yep, that's cool. That baggage sounds like baggage. I'm happy. Like it's very natural. So yeah, having things so that you can easily discern between different items in an inventory, different actions that you're doing, all those sorts of things, and making sure that there is enough kind of variance between them. Good example is, let's say you have multiple potions and each one does a different thing. Having a slightly different sound for each one that somebody could be able to pick up on and hear that audio cue and be like, all right, this is the healing one. This is the one that makes me about this big. Like those sorts of things are really helpful.
Yeah, most certainly. There's a great point from Turning Cog in here. And
yes,
I fully agree.
Yes.
With audio, we really only notice stuff when it's bad.
It's also true just for pretty much everything. Like there's a great thing I saw a guy talking about like no CGI in film and stuff like that. It's like a multi-part series or whatever, and there's usually way more CGI in a shot than you think, but you only notice the bad CGI. Like,
yes.
if the rest of it looks real, then your brain accepts it as real. So yeah, it's same thing for that. Pretty much all of it. You only really notice it when it's bad. Lip sync is another great example of that.
Oh, yeah. Lip sync is a great one.
I'm actually the opposite because, real quick, while you gather the thing on the back end, real quick tangent. My mother has 2 cochlear implants. She's very hard of hearing. I've gotten very used to doing things like reading lips because of her. And so when I see really good lip sync, I go, that's sick. Like, that's really cool. Like, I really notice it. Like, there's a few series that just do it so darn well. And I'm just like, oh, that's awesome. Love that.
Yes. Yeah.
If I can turn off the audio and read their lips and know what they're saying, you have nailed the lip sync. Try that with most other games. You're not gonna have a dang old clue because it's not quite that good.
We're getting there. We're trying.
Getting there for sure. It's definitely better now than it's ever been. That's for sure. Especially with some of the more automated stuff.
Definitely. All right. Next thing up on the list.
The list.
I feel like I have to go lower. I've been going higher. We got to come back down.
You got to do the list. Like, you got to do both.
Yes. But allow for a varied range of control over play speed. So this falls kind of hand in hand with difficulty levels a lot of the time. But as with difficulty levels, this not only helps those with accessibility needs, it also helps players learn and play the game at a pace that they enjoy. Something that is not exactly related, but is parallel enough that I also included it under this point is, please, this is more of a request from me to you, please put a pause option in your game, whether that be from opening the main menu or whatnot. I cannot tell you how much stress I have as a gaming adult with games that do not let me pause. And I understand there are some, especially if it's a multiplayer experience or things like that, it's just genuinely not possible. But if you have a single player experience, please put a pause.
And I would even argue, depending on the multiplayer experience, have the option to still pause, because you could be, let's say, for example, playing a co-op game with your buddy, and I don't know, you get DoorDash or, something happens and you need to step away, and your buddy's like, oh yeah, that's cool, go ahead and pause the game. Then you can just pause the game and both people are happy. You can go get your food, come back, and now I wouldn't do that in just like, I can just jump into a lobby and pause the game for everybody. That's not very cool. But certain multiplayer experiences, it still makes sense to have that sort of option.
Yeah. Even if it's a prompt that all players agree to pause the game, sort of thing.
Yep.
It's that alone is incredibly helpful for a lot of people, and it doesn't just have to do with necessarily speed of gameplay, but sometimes also people can just get overwhelmed in the moment, whether that be from sound effects, visuals, the emotional impact of whatever the scene is. Sometimes we just need to pause and take a breath to fully appreciate what's happening at that moment. So that's a really helpful feature to include, is having an actual tangible pause in your game.
Yeah.
But another thing that falls under this category as well, there's a lot of timed elements in games in general, right? And I don't just mean like the game is going and you pause it. This is totally different. I mean, say you pick up a quest and you have a day-night cycle in your game. You pick up a quest, the quest giver tells you, you have 2 days to complete this task or it fails. The option to slow down that day-night cycle in an example like that is really helpful, because some people might literally just not be physically capable of completing the task in that initial default time frame that you have set. Or going back to like QuickTime events as well too, having the option where instead of there being a very limited time frame for you to find and press a certain button, even having the option to just turn the actual time of that off, where it might just hold in that section of the animation until the next button is pressed, and then it continues through that scene. There's a lot of different kind of creative ways that you can approach this one, but allowing that differing play speed can be extremely helpful for, across a multitude of reasons. But and again, you can be creative with it, but those are just some examples that I can think of.
Yeah. And again, these are options. You don't have to inherently, like, if time management is part of the game, then that's part of the game. Obviously, you want that to be a focus, but having that as an option for somebody to be able to kind of modify those to maybe give them just a little bit more wiggle room is great.
Yeah.
Doesn't have to be on by default, but it's great to have.
Yeah. One of the comments we just got was, yeah, but being attacked organizing inventory in Dark Souls is total immersion, which is true, but hear me out. What if, hear me out, Dark Souls, default, no pause, right? What if in the menu there is an option where you can turn on pause? So then people who like having that total immersion of everything is always happening and you need to be careful about what you're doing at what point in time. Are you safe where you are? Can someone come up on you? Some people do like having that experience for sure, and allow them to have that, definitely. But there's no harm in having an option that you can turn on separately to allow a pause button for people that might need it. You know what I mean? Yeah. Got you there. Checkmate. Checkmate, chat.
That was something that was always funny, because it was definitely something that happened a little bit more in like older games. Like Resident Evil was very guilty of it, where you're just like, there's a zombie this close to your face, and you're just like, pause. Okay, I'm gonna mix some herbs and that on me, and all right, let me refill my gun. All right, now pistol's not gonna work. I'm gonna have the shotgun here. All right, unpause. It's just very. I always found that very funny to me. It's always very amusing.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I call that just adrenaline simulation, but you know.
And there is a sense of like decision making that goes into that, where like you pause and you're like, okay, I can stay paused as much as here, but I have to now make the decision that will hopefully make me not get bit. And I have to figure that out now. Like, this is my moment.
Yeah.
And then there's the suspense of being like, all right, I'm ready.
Yeah. The anxiety of knowing that as soon as you unpause, it comes back out.
Yep.
Another bad analogy. Chess has clocks, get flagged.
Oh
no.
Nina.
They got me. They got me good. All right. So we have 2 more things on our list here.
On the list.
On the list. Sorry, not our list, the list. The one and only list.
The list.
Next is announce accessibility features on the packaging and website, or subsequently, if you release on Steam or something like that too, on your release page. So this allows those who need them to easily find them before they make a purchase, and will help drive players to your game as well, because they'll be aware of what you do and do not feature. So that is a problem, right? A lot of people may buy a game from the trailer because it looks awesome, because of course it does, because you made this sick thing, but they can't play it through one reason or another, just because of whatever accessibility needs that they may have that weren't met. So they have to return the game. It's sad for everyone. We all cry. Or alternatively, you can also have those accessibility features listed, which will avoid that first scenario altogether, but could also lead players that may have otherwise skipped your game instead give it a try, because now they know that maybe under other circumstances in this particular genre or something like that, they haven't usually been able to play, but they see, because you listed these features that are available, that they may actually be able to play this version of it through your experience. So now you're even getting players that you might have missed out on just by default to begin with. There's really no downside. Marketing in general is something that I think a lot of us developers can improve upon, and you're in luck, because we're going to talk all about that next week, but I'll go more on about that later. But this is easy, right? You've already made the thing. At this point, the game has been made. It is ready for release. You're just writing up all of the stuff that players need to know about your experience. Make sure you include those features in that, because why miss out on potential players for stuff that you put a lot of hard time, work, and energy into, when you could be pulling them in with it instead? Use it as another boost for why people should be purchasing your game, playing your experience. There's no reason to not, basically. So do it. Do it.
Do it. Just do it.
Do it. Anything you'd like to add on that, Dan?
Agree.
Great.
A solid agree. No, I mean, I could have said it better myself. It was great.
Thumbs up. Not even 2 thumbs up. Just the one? Oh my god.
It was a really strong one.
I guess that's fair. That's fair. Yeah. Angle on it. It's not like a maybe. Yeah. It's solid, you know?
Got the follow through. Good animation principles. Come on.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So the next one, and this is the last one on the list. For now. But if there are other topics that we didn't cover that you'd like us to discuss, we still have a little bit of time too. So,
and I do have one thing that I want to circle back at the very end, because I thought of it and we were talking and then we moved on and I forgot to circle back to it. So,
oh no, I actually also have something to circle back on, because I also forgot. So we'll do another loop. We'll another quick lap at the end.
Yeah, exactly.
But this last one is options for motion sickness. So,
Yeah, it may not.
Arguably, I think motion sickness affects like a huge percentage of players, and it can be based off of a couple different things that are really easy to just have an on-off for in your game.
Yeah, and it's one of those that I guess it makes sense that it would be considered an accessibility feature. It's not one that I ever really thought of in that same umbrella, but it's a really important one because thankfully I don't suffer from that, but I know far too many people who do, where they either just don't play games because of it, or the games that they play they're very limited to because of those sorts of sicknesses. Motion sickness, otherwise known as simulation sickness, because technically motion sickness is when you're moving. Sim sickness is another is the more, I guess, technical term for that. Like Tina said, it's a big deal, and for some people it's really hard to rid, but for a lot of others, just a few simple tweaks or options can go a long way for minimizing to even completely eliminating those sorts of symptoms for them, which is great.
Yeah, and a couple options that I can think of off the top of my head, because I very much suffer from motion sickness. It's rough. It's rough out there, friends. But a motion blur option, and these are also Turning Cog listed a few great options too. But motion blur, head bob. Oh,
that's so funny, because those are really, those are actually going to come up a little bit.
Yeah. Head bob is crazy. That one gets me every time. Please just give me a steady camera. Motion blur, bloom, chromatic aberration, yes. A couple other ones that I personally like having control over too is FOV. I know you mentioned that before, Dan. Oh my god, I'm forgetting what it's called. The sharpness.
The sharpness?
Yes. It's like oh my god, help me out here, y'all.
I mean, there is sharpness.
It's not sharpness though. I mean, it is, but it's not. Anti-aliasing, yes.
Oh, okay.
Thank you so much.
There you go.
Having control over that too is super helpful for me, because if I just turn it off, because if walking by something, it's trying to create that anti-aliasing, especially on foliage. If you're walking through a bunch of grass, for example, and have that on, no. It's awful.
We actually just posted this in the chat. There's a cool video that you guys should check out. It's short, it's brief, it's really more of just kind of like a surface level topic for anti-aliasing, but it's by Masahiro Sakurai, and he kind of has this brief video that you can check out that kind of just discusses what it is, common issues with it, and then some common ways that you can go through and solve it. There's not really a one size fits all for these sorts of things, so it's usually great to have options that are tweakable. Another really good example actually here, funny enough, because we actually talked about it just a little bit ago, is that same The Last of Us accessibility options here has a good list of, I'm scrolling too far up, let's find it, there we go, some accessibility options specifically for motion sickness, which a lot of these are things that Gina already mentioned: camera shake, motion blur, dolly zoom effect, being able to adjust your field of view up or down, camera distance up or down. This one is really been found to be very helpful, is to just have that simple little dot in the middle of your screen, because the common theory as to what causes sim sickness is a discrepancy between what you're seeing and what you're feeling. So there's ways that you can anchor yourself in your real environment that helps kind of separate it from the background. One of them, I think Tina even had mentioned this before, is sitting further back away from your screen so that your peripheral has much more stable elements than what's directly in front of you. It's actually one of the reasons why VR is so challenging to deal with motion sickness, because you got nothing to stabilize yourself into. It is, you are in that world. So sitting back a little bit, having UI elements that are completely stagnant, like a little dot in the center, having that as an option. If you don't want a dot in your screen, you can have it off by default, but having an option to have a dot can be very helpful. And then, yeah, little things like that just reduce the motion. So camera shake, if you're walking and your camera's bobbing every time you take a step, being able to turn those sorts of things off. It is a balance, because the more of these elements you add, the more immersive your experience, and they can be great. A lot of people will really like them, but definitely make sure that you have the option when building them to disable them for those who wouldn't be able to play your game otherwise if everything was still fully enabled. So there's some really good resources out there for this.
Yeah, for sure. A couple calls I want to make from chat here. I've seen a couple people mention switching to third person helps a lot, because first person perspective is a huge reason for people getting motion sickness. So that's also something to consider, even if you're building your game to be a first person experience. At least having an option where you can pop into third is helpful for a lot of people. I know that that's asking a lot, because developing for first person and third person are two very different development patterns.
Sure.
But having the option to swap between both is really helpful for people. I do also, it's really funny. There's a couple people are talking about what to do for motion blur, and I'm seeing like blur the cursor as it gets closer to the option. That's just rude, y'all.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this is one of those things where a lot of that is actually through post effects. A lot of these things that cause motion sickness are through like post process or post effects. So really just having that option to potentially turn things off, just a simple on off switch, is endlessly helpful for people. I did see a question earlier as well where someone asked if using Dramamine works for when people have sim sickness. And no, it doesn't, because it's a different effect, right? The problem with actual motion sickness is it's a problem with your inner ear, and that's what Dramamine helps you with. Sim sickness, you're not actually moving, right? The disparity is that what you are seeing, what you are cognitively experiencing and physically experiencing are two completely separate things. So that's why you're getting sick, because your brain is trying to make your body understand or believe that, oh, right now I am walking forward, when your body is like, no, I'm not. I am very much just sitting here right now. And it's that dissonance that really causes a lot of sim sickness. And unfortunately, medication doesn't help. You have to just lay down and wait.
It's also one of those things where I would argue you really ideally don't want people to have to take medication to play your game. Like,
yeah,
that was a solution. That's a great sort of thing. But as a designer, it's really good to try to offer these as options inherently, so you don't have to worry about that thing. As Tina said, on and off switch is like, I didn't want to say bare minimum, but it's a really good like foundation. But really, if you can put those on sliders too, that's also great, because you can still have maybe you don't get, sim sick when it's at like 30%. That way you're still getting some of those immersive characteristics, but it's not just enough where you're like, oh my God, is that sort of thing. So if you can put it on a slider, that's even better, and let them control it.
Yeah. There's a question, would earplugs help with the motion sickness? I actually don't know, but that's an interesting question. I'm going to have to research that myself.
Because it's a gravity thing, but maybe.
I don't know. I'd have to look that up. That's interesting.
Somebody do a science and get back to us.
Yes, someone who is more scientifically inclined than we are, please let us know. Ragdoll physics is also brought up in here. So, oh my God. I'm just imagining a scenario of like you being in first person while you ragdoll physics.
There are games that do it, and it is
and
very
it's,
orienting for sure. Yep.
for sure. If that's a potential for something that you're building where the player character ragdoll physics, Helldivers, not to bring them up again, but they have a great example of this too. Obviously, when you die in Helldivers 2, it pulls out to a third-person perspective as you ragdoll physics. So you still get the hilarity of it without actually experiencing it first person. So that could be one way to handle a situation like that, or even having that as an option, again, that you can turn on, where if by default, maybe you're still in that first-person camera while you physics around. There's a better way to phrase this, but this is where I am right now.
Well, it's very common for anytime there's really jarring movement, even in a first-person, or I should say especially in a first-person game, to pull that camera out temporarily during the duration of that animation and then coming back in once it's finished. I mean, you can see that in dozens of games that do that, which is a really good option for that. Honestly, I kind of think it'd be funny to do the opposite, where games that have it by default pull out, to have the option to be like, I want to stay in the whole time and just tumble around and go,
see what happens.
Yeah.
Full immersion.
Exactly.
That would make for some chaotic gameplay clips for certain.
I feel like that happens a lot in VR.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm gonna imagine. All right.
All right, do we get to the circle back? Wait.
That was the conclusion of the list. So now we'll
finished the list.
The list.
It's finished.
Has been
I will remember and cherish it.
Yes.
Forever and always.
This definitely feels like another soundboard moment where we should have had like emotional piano music or something. Like, thank you.
Exactly. Just a little violin going.
Yeah. But it's not official yet because we have to circle. So what were you gonna circle back on first?
Okay, I'll do mine real quick. This one went back to the difficulty. And what I like about some of these, accessibility options for difficulty is they prove beneficial both as accessibility options, but they also can prove really good for just like replay value or just like customizing an experience to the kind of experience you want. This doesn't happen very often, but I really love when you can see games that let you separate different difficulties. So a really good example would be like Silent Hill 2. You have the difficulty of the combat and you have the difficulty of the puzzles, and you can adjust those separately. I believe Tomb Raider, those games also do that as well. So being able to be like, you know what? I'm really good at combat, but I'm dumb as a brick. So don't make me puzzle. Thank you. That's a really great option. Or the opposite, where I've had people that I know where they're just like, man, my favorite thing about, Tomb Raider is going in the tombs, and I hate that when I'm done, I get shot by 7 guys and die. Being able to be like, all right, the puzzles are really hard, but combat is really easy. That's really great. And even going so far, this is rare, but I have seen it in a few instances. I wanted to circle back to it because I was hoping I would remember it once I did, and I still have not. But there was a game that goes so far is like you can justify how much health enemies have versus how much damage they do versus how much damage you receive or whatever. And you can fully customize it. So if you're just like, you know what, I want to go through a challenge run on my second one where I do the minimum amount of damage and they have the maximum amount of health, or we're all glass cannons, everybody's one shot, or whatever, like any sort of thing like that, it not only allows somebody who like maybe struggles with that to fine tune an experience for them, but then also gives people who aren't, who don't necessarily need those accessibility features, ways to play your game in new, fun, and great ways. And I think those are also really good things to consider when developing like difficulty for your games.
Yeah, most certainly. There is a quick question I wanted to tackle from chat here about, did you handle misophonia? It was asked me a few times as something people would like. We didn't, but I feel like that could probably fall under the
No, I really do.
Like
I really do.
Yeah,
I've never felt more like the Hulk than when somebody was chewing with their mouths open right next to me, and I'm just like, No, I feel that.
Just slowly losing sanity points.
Oh, it was there's like that single sweat that's going down while my vision just narrows.
Yeah. I think and again, this is definitely one of those things where there's probably quite a few more unique ways to handle this than what I'm going to list off, but a couple of options goes back to individual volume sliders, kind of like Dan was describing, where you can either turn down sound effects in particular if there's an effect that is bothering someone, turn down voices, turn down different parts of the audio that might be causing that reaction. But another potential is same with how there's like phobia settings I've seen a lot in games recently, where if someone has arachnophobia or tryptophobia or things like that, they list those options in the beginning of there are spiders. Do you have arachnophobia? If yes, hit yes. And then they just replace the model entirely with something that's not an arachnid. So probably researching maybe like, top 5, top 10 misophonic triggers. Like I know, like what Dan said, hearing people chewing or smacking their mouth is a huge one. So maybe you could have an option to disable those particular sound effects that are listed just under like possible misophonia situations, and then handle it like that. But that's just one option. I'm sure there are other much more clever ways of going about it than what I've mentioned, but that's how I would probably approach it at first.
I love the different solutions that devs come up for with like arachnophobia. That seems to be the most common. I'm curious if chat has a few good ones. I love the one, I think it's House Flipper, where they have cockroaches, but if you're scared by cockroaches, it's just broken glass instead. And I think that's a very funny way. It's just piles of broken glass that you have to clean up instead of, skittery scattery cockroaches. It's a very clever way of getting around that while still keeping the game mechanic. The game mechanic is the same. You deal with them the same way, but it avoids that for those who, I don't know who's a fan of cockroaches, but who are particularly, adverse to them.
We got cockroach fan number 1 popping up in chat. Like, how dare you?
Joe's apartment over here.
You never know. But that's definitely that's an interesting one. And we didn't include that. And I'm disappointed in myself.
There's too much to cover, like realistically. Like there's a lot.
Yeah. Like I said at the beginning of this is kind of like what I consider sort of entry level into the discussion of accessibility, because there's way more. There's endlessly more that could be spoken about and handled and developed for, but this is it's a good starting place, Then the thing I wanted to circle back on were some statistics.
Yay, statistics.
Yay!
We love those.
Statistics that I forgot to mention.
Wait, do I know these statistics? Am I?
You know some of them.
Should I be prepped? Prepped? Huh?
Should I be prepped? Yes.
I think I should always be prepped, to be honest. Everybody here should be.
So these are mainly around subtitles, and I know we kind of we went on about subtitles for a bit, but I'm
speed run.
I'm passionate about it. What can I say? I'm passionate about a good
I also think
subtitle.
they're really interesting. I even told Tina when she read one of them off, I'm like, I actually thought that might have been higher, and it wasn't, which is great.
Yeah. So just kind of generally, when subtitles are off by default, 60% of players opted to turn them on. So more than half. And this is the one that kind of blows my mind. Games that have subtitles on by default, only 5% of players went out of their way to turn them off. So definitely something to consider.
Yeah, I mean, that just goes to show how beneficial it is to most people and how much of how little of a nuisance it is to others. Like, it's pretty much net positive.
Yeah. Then some other stats, because we're on stats right now. Listen, I think statistics are fun. Okay, you can bully me if you want. I don't care.
Listen, we're all nerds here, right? Like that's kind of the whole point.
But Into the Dead reported like they had gyro controls by default and 3 alternative schemes. So it was either left-handed virtual stick, right-handed virtual stick, and or left/right buttons, just either side. And these alternatives, like the alternative schemes besides the one that you just start with by default, actually were the alternatives were used by 75% of players. So I feel like that even harkens back to the remapping conversation we had. A huge amount of players will customize play style schemes to fit themselves. I feel like there's a period somewhere in that sentence, but I can't find it.
And there it is.
Right here is the period to that sentence. But it's a huge amount of players will alter key bindings for themselves. I mean, this is just one game, so this can't be applied to everything, of course, but yeah, 75% of players actually used alternative mapping schemes, so something to consider for sure.
Yeah.
Those were the main stats I had. That was my circle back. So we did it.
Need more stats. Need more stats. No, that was great. I love it.
Yeah. So that was the list.
The list.
In its entirety and its returns. Someone called me a nerd. Oh my gosh.
Oh no. Oh.
Oh no.
It's like the 56,000th time my whole life.
It's fine. I'll just internalize this.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was the list. That was everything that we wanted to cover for today. I know there's, like I said, there's tons and tons more that can be done on and around this topic, but we felt like this was a good place to start to kind of get the conversation going. And if you have anything that you have found particularly helpful while developing for different accessibility features in your projects, please feel free to leave that as a comment on the videos so that other people can read and learn more too. We'll be making a giant list of all of the resources that we went through today, and pinning that as well so that if you're interested in learning more about any of this, you have those resources to be able to do so. Although there's a question. Never mind. Hold on. Question, had to step away from chat for a moment. In the UE docs are examples and the content examples for accessibility. There are some. So we do have some documentation that's centered around accessibility. Right now, it's mostly around text-to-speech. There's a quick guide for how to start up an integrated text-to-speech program in your project. So definitely something to check out there. That's something you're interested in. But in general, the resources are everywhere. They're varied. They're all across all different kinds of platforms. So I'll do my best to make up a little library, if you will, for you all to have access to. But that's everything I have to say for today. Is there anything else that you wanted to add in there, Dan?
No, I think we mostly covered it. Like Tina said, this is kind of the beginning. We're gonna stock, create that library and send that out to you guys, but also know that is just scratching the surface. There's plenty more resources out there, to find and learn from. So definitely worth taking the time to implement these things. You'd be surprised how they're like unsung hero things, right? Like I don't think people are often going on Twitter and just being like, oh my God, there was this option, but people use it and they love it. Oh yeah, you're right. Sorry. But they use it and they love it. The fact that they're used is indicative enough that they're beneficial to people. And there's a lot of really great tools out there that, make this stuff, again, fairly low lift. So we recommend really considering kind of doing as much as you can, right? Like we said, not everybody's going to be able to do, Naughty Dog levels. But even if you have a handful of the really important ones that affect the most people, that's a start, and that's great, and that's more than you would have if you obviously didn't. Obviously,
Yeah,
so
definitely.
yeah.
All right. Well, thanks so much for that, Dan. If y'all have enjoyed the pairing of Dan and I just rambling for about 2 hours, don't worry, you're gonna get more of that because we're actually gonna do another pretty low-key stream, kind of like this one was next week, where we're going to be talking.
We're definitely gonna be talking.
We're gonna be talking.
That's talking marketing put together.
Yes,
right there.
That was a sneak peek of the topic. We're going to be talking about marketing, how to market your game, how to market your work. Also, this is not just going to be about games and projects. This is also going to be for portfolios. So for students that are hoping to break out, stand out, all that kind of stuff, how to make sure that you set up all of your content in a way that is easily discoverable, as well as even like if we use some of our own examples, right? We have our own weekly news and community spotlight that we do. It's what we play at the start of each of the shows. When we go through weekly, we just go to the internet and we find cool projects that people have made using Unreal Engine, but we have a stipulation for things that we require in order to be able to include them as spotlights. Such as having at least a 30-second video going through your project or showing off different angles, things like that. So we'll be covering that for students, for projects, for marketing your game, how to get out there, how to break past the social anxiety barrier that I know a lot of us developers have to really try and launch your stuff out into the public eye. So we'll be covering all of that next week. If that is interesting to you, make sure you come for that. Another thing we wanted to offer, actually, we would be totally willing to do kind of like portfolio reviews as well. So if any of you like the sound of that, Dan, I don't know if you can pop up my lower third here, but just reach out to me on X/Twitter. Send me a DM. Let me know that you're interested in potentially having your portfolio looked over, and we'll actually pull it up on stream, and we'll talk about some ways that you could potentially take it to the next level. These are, I should qualify, this is not like the rule. This is not how you make it or break it. This is just suggestions from Dan and I on ways that we think you could kind of elevate your stuff a little bit. But if that's something you're interested in, feel free to send that over and we'll look into that. We'll also just have some general tips and tricks that we'll go through. But that's next week.
Yeah.
As for this week, thank you all so much for taking the time to be here and to learn about accessibility and chat with us and be open to the conversation. That's great and huge in and of itself. So just thank you for being here. Thank you, Dan, for being a guest.
Thanks
plus
for having
also
me.
running the stream. It's a lot, and I appreciate you being here and taking the time and mental bandwidth to do that.
Oh, of course, absolutely. Anytime. I love coming out here and talking cool, fun stuff, and I'm really looking forward to next week because we got some cool tips and tricks, and I think a lot of them might be things that people might be pretty well aware of, and I think some of them are probably things that you may not have actually considered that can really benefit you, especially if you want to make it in the news and community spotlight. I know a guy who does those, so he has some very specific things he looks for. So
yes, and I think we should probably Dan is the one that edits those, just in case that was too ominous sounding, vague and ominous. Dan is the one that edits them. So if you're interested in becoming a spotlight, listening to his tips is probably quite useful.
And they're also just generally good rules, right? Like we pick the stuff that is really nice and it is presented well. So these are just going to be tips that, hopefully will help you be able to present your stuff well as well as well.
All right. Well, with that, that's everything for today. Thank you all so much for being here. If you missed any part of the stream, don't worry, because we post all of our streams in video format that can be viewed on demand on both our Twitch and YouTube at Unreal Engine. You can also keep up with all the latest news, all the latest stuff that's not news. I don't know what that would be, but things that are new and aren't news. You can do that on all of our social media at Unreal Engine. as well as please come say hi in our forums on our Epic developer community. We have a ton of tutorials, we have our documentation there, we have the forums where you can meet other like-minded developers and get your questions answered, as well as just meet cool people. It's cool stuff. Cool things are happening there. So check out the Epic developer community if you haven't already. And yeah, that's, now that I have a breath, that's that. All right.
Awesome.
We will see you all next week, hopefully. Most of you, please come. It'll be a good time.
You are obligated now at this point.
You are morally obligated to show up. You have to. All right. Thank you, everybody. Bye.